1974 and a recipient of State Department's awards and more than 35 patriotic awards. Dr. David Duke was elected to Louisiana House of Representatives in 1989. Despite his controversial background, he won election to the Louisiana legislature in the face of massive media and establishment opposition. And then, in subsequent statewide races for governor and US senator, he received over 60% of the white vote. In the process of those elections, he defeated the sitting Republican governor and gave an 18-year incumbent Democratic senator the closest re-election race of his career. Until the year 2002, he served as chairman of the Republican Party in the largest Republican parish in Louisiana, the only one with a Republican majority. And he is still a Republican Party member. At a time the nations are talking of dialogues of civilizations, listening to Dr. David will be useful since he represents the sizable minority of American civilization. Specifically, we have chosen the topic Zionism and the world as we feel the pinch of its effects at our neighborhood, which no sensible human can dispute, for which ironically we don't see much lobbying to prevent. Now I call upon Dr. David Duke to take the mic. Dr. David.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I'll get my computer set up here. Modern ages. No more notes, computers. First off, let me wish all of you a very happy Ramadan. And I want to tell you that I'm not a Muslim, I'm Christian, but I believe in my heart, I know in my heart, that the closest two religions on this earth are Christianity and Islam. And unlike some Christians and many Jews who say that there's a clash of civilization between Christendom and Islam, I believe this clash is artificial, and I think that our two faiths, Christianity and Islam, are the closest faiths on earth. And I'm very proud to be among men and women who share a belief in the divine and the one God. I'm going to discuss an issue that is critical not just to the people of Palestine or the people of Arabia or the people of the rest of the world, but indeed I'm going to discuss an issue that's critical even to the Jewish people themselves. It's an issue defined as Zionism. And it's an issue that's defined by a new theory, not a new theory, but an old theory of racial and ethnic supremacy. And it may be interesting for some of you to think, why is David Duke talking about racial supremacy? I've been attacked by a couple of the newspapers saying that I'm a racial supremacist or I'm a white supremacist. I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a white supremacist. I am proud of my heritage. I want to preserve my heritage like almost all people want to do. But I don't believe in supremacy. I don't believe in people suppressing other people. I don't believe in hatred. I don't believe in compulsion against other individuals. And the interesting thing is that the Jewish media around the world and the Jewish lobby around the world always calls haters or bigots or supremacists people that dare to oppose the ultimate form of racial supremacy in the world, and that ultimate form of racial supremacy is Jewish supremacy. Now, what my talk will deal with is showing how this phenomenon does exist, how it exists, and how it exercises power both in the Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, and in the United States and in Europe. And it's interesting for them to accuse me of being a supremacist because, again, they are the world's greatest supremacists. No matter where you go around the world, the Jewish community, and not all Jews, but the leading elements of Jewish community, are dedicated first and foremost to the interests of the Jewish people. And they support, almost in unanimity, the state of Israel. And the state of Israel, make no mistake about it, is in fact a racial state. Many Jewish leaders themselves define the Jewish people as, in fact, a race. To immigrate to Israel from anywhere around the world, you do not have to believe in the Jewish faith. You have to be of Jewish blood. If a Jewish person who is an atheist, non-religious Jew in Russia or Germany or America or Canada or anywhere in Africa, if he wants to go to Israel, he's allowed to go and to enter, and he'll receive many benefits from the Israeli government to go to Israel simply by being of Jewish descent. Whereas Palestinians who were born in this land and whose families were expelled, brutally expelled in ethnic cleansing in the takeover of Palestine in 48 and 49, if he wants to return home, he's not even allowed to return to the place of his birth. Israel is based on the preservation and the advancement of the Jewish people, the Jewish race as such. And around the world, Jews identify themselves as a people who have first allegiance to the Jewish people over the nations they reside in. Now I know that when a Gentile, when a non-Jew says such a thing, that he's often accused of, quote, anti-Semitism. And that's kind of a strange word in itself, anti-Semitism. I think there's a lot of Semites in this room. In a way, if you look at our biblical traditions and our other traditions, we're all Semites. But it's interesting that there's a term for those who oppose Jewish supremacism called anti-Semitism, but there's no corresponding term like anti-Islam or anti-Christian. There's no similar term for the other side of the equation. I want to quote first, and the way I deal with my arguments is I use the arguments of, I guess, those who oppose me. I use major Jewish figures and let you listen to their words, and then you judge whether I'm correct about my analysis. Tonight, I want to quote to you from a major Jewish leader in the United States of America by the name of Dr. Richard Steinlein. He's with the American Jewish Committee, which is one of the largest, in fact, it's the most prominent Jewish organization in the United States. He was head of the national affairs of that committee. And he had a recent paper dealing with and discussing the immigration issue. And I will quote some from the paper where he talks openly about some of the Jewish power in America. Quote, "Will Jewish sensitivities continue to enjoy extraordinarily high levels of deference? And will Jewish interests continue to receive special protection?" He goes on to say, "Not that our disproportionate political power, pound for pound, the greatest of any ethnic cultural group in America, will erode all at once, or even quickly, unless the triumph of campaign finance reform is complete, an extremely unlikely scenario. The great material wealth of the Jewish community will continue to give it significant advantages. We will continue to court and be courted by the key figures in Congress. That power is exerted within the political system, from the local to the national levels, through soft money, and especially the provision of out-of-state funds to candidates sympathetic to Israel." So here's the head of national affairs for the largest Jewish organization admitting that they don't want campaign finance reform in America because they can concentrate their money on candidates who put the interests of Israel first. He goes on, "It's also true," and this is obviously an article in a Jewish magazine for a Jewish audience. You're not meant to hear this. The average American is not meant to hear this. "It's also true that Jewish economic influence and power are disproportionately concentrated in Hollywood, television, in the news industry, theoretically a boon in terms of the formation of favorable public images of Jews, and sensitizing the American people to issues of concerns to Jews." Now he's admitting Jewish domination in the American media, and how, and this is again a Jewish leader, saying that it's creating public favorable images of Jews and sensitizing the American people to issues to concern of the Jews. That's why a mass murderer like Ariel Sharon, a man guilty of the murder, the cold-blooded murder of at least 1,000 Palestinian men, women, and children in an Israeli-guarded concentration camp in Lebanon, that this man can be brought to the White House without reporters bombarding him every second about his murderous record. Because again, their control in the media allows this to take place. Steinlein goes on to say something, makes an admission in this article, that if I made this statement, they would accuse me of being uttering hatred against the Jewish people and being, quote, anti-Semitic. But I'm not the author of this statement. The author of this statement, again, is a leading Jewish person in the United States Jewish community. Quote, I confess it, at least, like thousands of other typical Jewish kids of my generation, I was reared as a Jewish nationalist, even a quasi-separatist. Every summer for 2 months for 10 formative years during my childhood and adolescence, I attended Jewish summer camps. There each morning, I saluted a foreign flag, dressed in a uniform reflecting its colors, sang a foreign national anthem, learned a foreign language, learned foreign folk songs and dances, and was taught that Israel was the true homeland. Immigration to Israel was considered the highest virtue, and like many other Jewish teens of my generation, I spent 2 summers working in Israel on a collective farm while I contemplated that possibility. More tacitly and subconsciously, I was taught, quote, I was taught the superiority of my people to the Gentiles who had oppressed us. We were taught to view non-Jews as unworthy, untrustworthy outsiders, people from whom sudden gusts of hatred might be anticipated, people less sensitive, less intelligent, and less moral than ourselves. We were also taught the lesson of our dark history, that we could rely on no one. Of course, we saluted the American and Canadian flags and sang those anthems, usually with real feeling, but it was clear where our primary loyalty was meant to reside. I don't know if I have to say anything else tonight. That's Dr. Richard Steinlein. He was head of national affairs of the largest and most powerful Jewish organization in America, confessing that he was taught, like most of the Jews of his generation, to have loyalty to Israel over that of the United States of America. And these people have infiltrated and they have come to dominate the government of the United States of America. And that's why, and the media of the United States of America, and much of it of Europe, and that's why we have the kind of policy that we have in the Middle East. He says something else in the article which I think is very interesting, and it shows why the personal campaign went on against me even before I had a chance to speak to you tonight. He says, quote, for perhaps another generation, the Jewish community is thus in a position where it will be able to divide and conquer and enter into selective coalitions that support our agenda. I'll give that quotation again. Perhaps the Jewish community will be in a position where we'll be able to divide and conquer and enter into selective coalitions to support our agenda. Dividing and conquering. That is the method of operations all over the world, and it's something that's been going on a long time, even a lot longer than before the Middle East. Now, are the Jews a race? I'll give you some quotes. Forward, this is one of the major Jewish magazines in the United States. They suggested that Jews fill out a form on the American census and list themselves, in fact, as a race. The famous Rabbi Stephen Wise, who was one of the biggest Jewish leaders of America during the last century, he stated, Hitler was right in one thing, he said, we are a race. He said, we've been Americans for perhaps 200 years, but we've been Jews for 6,000 years. And go forward. I'll give you another example of the supremacy, the racial supremacy that Israel is teaching and preaching, and the absolute hypocrisy of their position, because you see, no one is quicker to condemn you or I for preserving our heritage. In America, the American Jewish Committee is working on making sure kids don't sing Christmas carols in their schools, destroying every vestige of our Christian tradition. In other nations, they work on destroying Muslim traditions and culture. But they themselves are dedicated to preserving their own culture, and they're blatant about it. One of the leading Zionists in the world, not some minor figure. His name is Charles Bronfman. He's one of the largest magnates of alcohol, of liquor, of whiskey. And he's a main sponsor, and one of the richest men in the world, by the way, and he's the main sponsor of a $210 million organization called Birthright Israel. It's an organization specifically committed to preventing intermarriage between Jews and Gentiles, and the expressed need to preserve the Jewish genetic character, Jewish DNA. In fact, this is quoted in a Jewish magazine, and again, you can go to my website, davidduke.com, and you can get everything I say, I document. I will quote him. He said, he's talking to Jewish young people, and he tells them that they should never intermarry, that they must keep the Jewish people pure, and he says, quote, "You're losing a lot." Quote, "Losing the kind of feeling you have when you know that throughout the world there are people who somehow or other have the same kind of DNA that you have." He sponsors Jews to go to Israel from all over the United States so they will meet and marry Jewish mates. Every Jewish organization in the United States has huge campaigns to prevent intermarriage. Now, the reason I bring this up again is the hypocrisy of both the Jewish press and the Jewish power in America. Last year, when President Bush and Al Gore were running for president, President Bush went and spoke at a university in South Carolina, North Carolina, Bob Jones University. And the university has a policy, a quiet policy, of opposing interracial and interreligious marriages between Christians and non-Christians and whites and blacks. The media in America, the Jewish-dominated media in America, condemned George Bush for this indiscretion, and in fact, it went on for weeks, attacks on George Bush. But George Bush, of course, addressed many synagogues and many Jewish organizations, all which have the same kind of policy. But was this ever mentioned in the American press? Was this ever made an issue? Of course not. I want to discuss some of the issues now in terms of what the Jewish power and media and government, what they're doing in terms of the conflict between Christianity and Islam. As I said, there's no faiths on earth that are closer than Christianity and Islam. The interesting thing is that because Israel has certain objectives in the Middle East, such as the war in Iraq, a war against Iran, and possibly even ultimately a takeover of the oil fields of Saudi Arabia and other Arab lands, because they're doing that, they're preaching a new ideology called the conflict of civilizations. And they're saying there's a tremendous clash between Christendom and Islam that's developing. Well, ladies and gentlemen, they are the one that's developing this clash. They are telling Christians that Islam is their enemy. And they're telling, in some ways, Islam that Christianity is their enemy. And when Christian nations attack Iraq or attack or support Israel in the attack of Palestinians, obviously Islam has a reaction to that. But let's talk about the two-faced for a second and find out the reality of it. In the truth of the matter, Islam is far closer and friendly to Christianity than is Judaism. I'll give you an example. And many people, again, are not aware of this. They're aware of this in Israel. In Israel, in the schools, not even allowed to mention the name of Jesus. The Talmud, which is the chief religious book of Judaism, is full of terrible attacks against Jesus and his mother Miriam. And I can quote from the Talmud on those, and I'll just give you a couple of quotes from those from the Talmud. I'll give you the exact quote, and I can quote to you from the Jewish Encyclopedia, where they admit that Balaam, which is what they call Jesus, is the name they use for Jesus. Sometimes they will try to slide out and say, no, these quotes really aren't against Jesus and not against Mary. But I can show you in our own encyclopedias compiled by rabbinic groups where they exactly say the same thing. I'll give you some quotes. And excuse me for the language in some of these quotes. The Talmud is a very, very vicious book with tremendous hatred against Gentiles and Christians and people who are non-Jews. Of course, as you know, Islam believes that Jesus was a prophet. But I'll go ahead and give you the quotes from the Talmud. Balaam, Jesus, fornicated with his jackass. Jewish priests raised Balaam, Jesus, from the dead and punished him boiling in hot semen. I hate to say these things. I hate to have to give you these kinds of quotes with this obscenity. But you must understand what's in the Talmud. That's from 57a in Gittin. She who was a descendant of princes and governors, the Virgin Mary, played the harlot with a carpenter. That's from Sanhedrin 106a. They talked about what they called the killing of Jesus. And they said Jesus was lowered into a pit of dung up to his armpits. And in fact, the Talmud claims that Jesus was subjected to 4 deaths. Now, I can go on and on with Talmudic quotations about Jesus. The interesting thing is, and while some Christians are being told that Islam is an enemy of Jesus and an enemy of Christianity, the interesting thing is that the Quran itself discusses the Jewish slanders against Jesus and Mary. The Holy Quran says itself, and I have the quotations here if I can find them. Thank goodness for computers. Get it for me exactly so I know exactly what we're dealing with. It says that it was talked about the false charges against Miriam and the false charges against Jesus. The Quran says that Jesus actually did have an immaculate conception. I'll go on. The Talmud itself is a vicious book that equates non-Jews with beasts and animals. And I can give you many quotations from the Talmud to show that. Only Jews are human. That's from Baba Mezza 114a, 114b. Even the best of the Gentiles, non-Jews, should be killed. A Jew is tempted to do evil, he should go to a city where he's not known and do evil there. Gentiles' flesh is as the flesh of asses, whose issue is like the issue of horses. Now, many people will tell you, when you talk about these issues, they'll say, this isn't true, this is not what the Talmud says about Gentiles. But I will now quote to you from the Jewish Encyclopedia issued by rabbinical Jewish groups themselves, and this is what they say in an article titled Gentiles, Discrimination Against Gentiles, pages 617 to 621. And this is what the Jewish Encyclopedia says about the Talmud's view of Gentiles. Quote, they held that only Israelites are men. Quote, Gentiles they classed not as men but as barbarians. Quote, another reason for the discrimination was the vile and vicious character of the Gentiles. Quote, whose flesh is like the flesh of asses and issue like the issue of horses. Quote, the Gentiles so strongly suspected of unnatural crimes was necessary to prohibit the stabling of a cow in their stalls. Quote, the Torah outlawed the issue of a Gentile as that of a beast. Quote, the Almighty offered the Torah to the Gentile nations also, but since they refused to accept it, he withdrew his shining legal protection from them and transferred their property rights to Israel. This is a quotation again from the Jewish Encyclopedia. The presumption is that the Gentile obtained possession by seizure. The property is considered public property like, quote, unclaimed land in the desert. Now, how can it be then that we have some evangelical groups in America actually saying vile things and terrible things against Muhammad, against Islam, and defending Israel, a religion and a nation that's extremely anti-Christian? And as a Christian, it hurts my soul, my spirit, to think that American money right now is going to Israel, and with their bombs and with their bullets and with their rockets, they are killing not only Palestinian Muslims, which is wrong, they're also killing Palestinian Christians. But that is indicative of the kind of power that they have in terms of our government and media in the United States. What's happened in America is religion has become televised, almost like the movies, like television programming. Televangelism, it's called. And these so-called religious leaders have learned that if they dare to question or challenge Jewish power, or don't go along with the Jews on these issues, they will pull the plug on those television programs. Let's talk more about the nature of the two religions, and again going back to the supremacism that I've talked about. I'll give an example, and again I use Jewish quotes here. You know, Christians, like Ramadan, Christians, our holidays and your holidays are based on peace and love and brotherhood. Your faith is based on the idea that if a person comes to your faith, it doesn't matter what their background is, their race, their nationality, their culture, they're fully accepted as a brother and sister. Isn't that correct? All right, Christianity is the same kind of faith. That's what Christianity says. That all the children of God, the chosen of God, are those that accept the teachings of God, the beliefs of God. Judaism, on the opposite hand, does not make that equation. The Jewish religion itself, the leaders of the Jewish religion, the Jewish priests, are not allowed to become priests if they are a convert or the descendant of a convert. Now, y'all are familiar, I'm sure, with some of the Nazi laws and regulations in Nazi Germany. The SS was the elite of the Germans, the elite. And one of the proofs that an SS member had to be in that organization was he had to prove his ancestry 6 generations back to be a leader of the German Reich. Judaism is stronger and harder racially than the Nazis were. Because under Judaism, you can't become a priest if you have any non-Jewish blood whatsoever for any number of generations. Another good example is how they treat, in terms of their opposition, they're at war with the world, not just Palestinians, not just Iraq, but with the world. They consider themselves at war. In fact, if you read Jewish texts and authors, it sounds like they're talking about war. Even the holidays of their faith are holidays that are based on military victories. In the Christian faith, our biggest holiday, of course, is Christmas. And it's the idea of Christ being born for all mankind. Our next biggest holiday is Easter, where Christ dying for the sins of mankind. The biggest Jewish holidays, well, you have Yom Kippur, which is celebration, Purim, which is celebrations of the victory against Haman. And in Yom Kippur, in the Jewish synagogues, they actually take willow trees and whip the willow trees, symbolizing the beating of Haman. This is a fact. Imagine in a temple of God to have a celebration of beating and whipping and hurting. They also have, at Christmas time, while we have Christmas, they have what they call Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is the miracle of the lights, which again celebrates their victory against the Greeks. And Jewish scholars discuss Hanukkah as a different kind of victory than Purim, because in Purim they said that the Persians were going to destroy the Jews, physically wipe them out, whereas they said the danger of the Greeks was that they would be assimilated with the Greeks. The danger was that the Greeks would treat them as equals and brothers and accept them, and that they would lose their religion by assimilation. They would not be strong racial supremacists anymore. Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, said, and I quote, he said, "I believe in the spiritual and the intellectual supremacy of the Jewish people." And I can quote you that, and I got that from a major Jewish magazine, a major Jewish publication, not me. So there is. Now, I know many of you, and in fact, many of you know a lot about Israel, but many of you have never heard some of these things and don't know about some of these things. And the reason why is because of this tremendous power in the press in the United States and around the world. And this power of the press and the power of movies gives us a completely different perception, just like Steinlein talks about. It gives the impression of the Jew, including the Jewish supremacist, as a very benevolent individual, while they slander other people who they feel as their enemies. Marlon Brando once got in trouble for mentioning this, by the way, and he ended up having to lick the shoes of, I think, Rabbi Wiesenthal in Los Angeles. But I'll give you an example this way. All of you have seen Hollywood movies about gangsters, organized crime. All of you have seen those kinds of movies. And all of us now, wherever you live in the world, whether you live in China, if you live in Africa, if you live in America, Asia, wherever you live, we have an impression or an image of the mafia or organized crime being Italian, Sicilian. That's the organized criminal. Usually some guy looks Italian, speaks Italian, organized crime. Few people are even aware that even in the United States, where they usually focus their criminal stories, even in the United States, Italian crime was never as extensive and powerful as Jewish crime. Yeah, you had Al Capone in the 1920s, but you also had the Bugsy Siegels. And the biggest organized crime boss in America, well, for the last 50 years until his death about a decade ago, was Meyer Lansky, who in fact now is buried in Israel. But Hollywood doesn't portray Jewish organized crime. Italian organized crime is the presentation. Another example, it's going on right now. You're seeing movies now that are often portraying Russian, they call it the Russian mafia, many movies. And when you see the movies and you see the Russian mafia, it's usually some big blonde Russian guy. And that's the Russian mafia. And it's true, the Russian mafia is probably the most dangerous mafia in the world. It has tentacles all over the world, including all over Europe, into the United States now, into the Eastern Bloc. And the Russian mafia makes the mafia of the 1930s that was Italian, Cosa Nostra, look very minor in comparison. But the media has been very careful to characterize this as the, quote, Russian mafia. The reality is it's not Russian at all. It's almost entirely Jewish. And one brave Jewish writer in the Village Voice in New York exposed this Jewish mafia. And he pointed out that the leader of the Russian mafia, the biggest Russian mafia boss in the world, is a man named Muglovich, who's an Eastern European Jewish gentleman. In Russia, a lot of the mafioso figures who've killed and stolen and so damaged the people like Berezovsky, Jewish. Even Brzezinski, who now the Jews are claimed to be persecuted, has been involved in tremendous amounts of organized crime. But they've very carefully constructed our image of what organized crime is supposed to be. So what Zionism is doing, my friends, it's not just about Palestine. It's not just about the occupation of the West Bank. It's about ancient Jewish prophecies. It's about a Jewish supremacism that makes them feel that they are God's chosen and they have the right to rule us. Now, thank goodness not all Jews endorse this kind of policy. And there are many Jews who have been very courageous in their opposition to it. One man died recently in Israel. And it was, in fact, one of the people who survived the Second World War. And these individuals, they don't simply want to dominate Palestine, they want to dominate everywhere. Some people ask me, what's the difference between the occupation, the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the Israeli occupation of Washington and New York in America? And I say the difference is the Palestinians know and understand that they're occupied. Whereas many Americans don't even know it. We don't have the right to know it. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how this operation works. I've given you some of the details, and I wish I had many hours tonight. Tomorrow, I'm going to address the 9/11 issue. I hope you come back tomorrow and bring your friends if you like this lecture and you find it interesting. And again, everything you can find documentation for what I say on my website. Tomorrow night, I'm going to discuss the Jewish involvement in the attacks on the World Trade Center. And I have very powerful evidence that shows Israel knew the details of this attack before it occurred and treacherously did not warn the United States because they wanted this attack to take place. And tomorrow night we're going to go into detail about that. But right now I want to talk about perhaps the most pertinent thing in this part of the world, the most important, maybe it's the most pertinent issue in the whole world right now, and that is America's current war with Iraq. And I say, by the way, current, because we're at war right now with Iraq. We bomb Iraq regularly. We embargo Iraq. We try to harm the country dramatically. The Iraqis have no sovereignty over their own land. And, of course, America is being led by the Jewish lobby, by the Jewish fifth column, I say, into a war, a physical war of occupation and destruction against Iraq. Now, I want to discuss the reasons that the Jewish media and the leadership in America says we should go to war or invade Iraq, and I want to discuss the realities. And this will illustrate how the American people are not being told the truth, and the people of the world are not being told the truth. Okay. I divide the reasons for the invasion of Iraq into seven reasons, smaller reasons. All right, the first reason they say that we should bomb Iraq into oblivion, kill a few 100,000 people, destabilize the Middle East. They say the first reason is that Iraq has biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction. And you know, if I were a betting man, a guessing man, I would think that it's likely that Iraq has some biological chemical weapons of mass destruction, or that it's trying to develop those weapons. But the real question that must be addressed is, who doesn't have those kinds of weapons? If America is going to go to war against every nation that has or tries to develop such weapons, we will fight a perpetual war all over the world that will eventually devastate our economy, our freedoms, kill millions of people, and damage severely the ecology and the well-being of this entire planet. And how will America justify going to war against Iraq for doing the same thing that dozens of other nations do? Israel, as you know, has one of the biggest stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons in the world. And Israel, in fact, has developed nuclear weapons. And the material they developed these weapons was stolen from the United States of America, which we know for a fact. Israel also has a maniac, mass murderer at its head, Ariel Sharon. In an interview with Amos Oz, an Israeli journalist, Ariel Sharon said, quote, "If one Israeli diplomat is killed, we're likely to start World War III just like that." So, America supplied the chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons that Iraq now has. Are you aware of that? Senator Robert Byrd, in sworn testimony in the United States Senate and Congress, discussed that. So how now do we justify America going to war against a nation for having chemical and biological weapons that the American government supplied? You know, if America gave these chemical weapons to Iraq, and this is a fact now, we know it for a fact, we gave them biological toxins from the Center of Disease Control in Atlanta. We gave them nerve gas. This is all in sworn testimony and admitted in the United States Congress. We gave them these gases in the expectation that Iraq would use them in the war against Iran. Now, why did we support Iraq in this way, this brutal way, in this war against Iran? Very simple. Because at that time, Israel saw Iran as the biggest threat. That was the boogeyman then to Israel. The biggest threat in terms of political power and economic power against Israel. As soon as Iraq had defeated Iran, then suddenly it showed that Iraq now had a huge military base, huge military prowess, and Israel didn't want any nation, no nation, to be able to challenge it in terms of military power. You know, despite the high-toned and moral pronouncements of the leader of my party, George Bush, these facts tell the world that America does not oppose biological and chemical weapons or their use. The federal government seems to only care about which side uses them. That's why the government turned a blind side to Iraq's use of those weapons against Iran, because America was at that time siding with Iraq. So, weapons of mass destruction are certainly not a worthy reason to go to war. The second reason promoted is that Iraq may give these weapons of mass destruction to terrorists and other nations. First off, There's not a shred of evidence that Iraq has given weapons of mass destruction to any terrorists or any other nations in the world. But again, on the other hand, weapons of mass destruction, their technology, has been given by Israel to other nations of the world. In fact, a recent report showed that even some of these weapons were given to the Republic of South Africa, which was a nation that the Jewish press promoted was a terrible, violent, horrible country. Israel was giving them biological and chemical weapons during this period. We know that for a fact. And we know that Israel has given top secret American technology to a serious enemy, possible rival to the United States, Red China, Communist China. Now, if America, by this logic, is supposed to bomb any nation that spreads biological and chemical weapons to other rogue nations, then I'm afraid the American Air Force is going to have to bomb the White House. Because by our own admission, we gave chemical weapons to the rogue nation of Iraq by our own definition. Is it any wonder why so much of the world thinks that the American government's gone crazy? If you look at all these things, there's only one reason why we're presenting this policy. It's because Israel wants this policy. It's not in the American interest to pursue this policy. The third reason is that Iraq has violated numerous United Nations resolutions. Well, if America bombs and invades every nation that's violated United Nations resolutions, it would be a perpetual war. And truthfully, the first target of American bombs would have to be the Jewish supremacist state of Israel. Do you agree with that? Do you agree? Let me hear you. Wake up. Right. Exactly. Any tally of violated United Nations resolutions would show Israel is the king of the violations of resolutions. And you know what? Those resolutions would be 50 times more except for the ones the United States of America vetoed. Right? And again, because of the Jewish lobby. The next argument is that Iraq supports international terrorists. Okay? That's number 4. Well, there's not a shred of evidence that supports that thesis. The government most responsible for international terrorism, again, of course, is Israel. Israel has even committed terrorism against the United States of America. Now, let me set that in very clearly for you a second. Saddam Hussein hasn't, but Israel has committed terrorist acts against the United States of America. The first incident I'll mention is the Lavon affair, back in the 1950s when Israel was fighting Egypt. Israel's agents in Egypt went out to bomb the American cinema in Egypt and American libraries in Egypt. On the way for them to bomb these prematurely in one of the Jews' pockets. The plot was uncovered. Israel had to eventually admit it. The defense minister of Israel, Pinhas Lavon, had to resign his position because of the scandal that erupted. But certainly, no attack on American installations in an attempt to blame them on the Egyptians could have been authorized except for the highest levels of government. And Lavon himself said this is a cover-up by the Israeli government because the Israeli government authorized this attack. So Israel was willing to bomb Americans and American installations and then falsely blame the Egyptians and get America into a war with a country that did not harm us. Yet, not a penny of U.S. aid stopped flowing to Israel. You know, if this plot would not have been uncovered, American bombs would have rained down on Cairo and Egypt, and we would have been in that war. Just as American bombs rained down on Afghanistan when we decided, or the American government decided that Afghanistan was sheltering terrorists who attacked the United States. But if that logic is good, why didn't America, in turn, bomb Tel Aviv for committing terrorism against us? Not only did we not bomb them or threaten them, we kept the supply of money and weapons going to this country. Ladies and gentlemen, that can only happen if powerful people who are traitors to the United States government have positions in in my country. Then again in 19... Ladies and gentlemen, that can only happen if powerful people who are traitors to the United States government have positions in my country. Then again in 1967, an American ship, the USS Liberty, was off the coast of Israel. Israel buzzed the ship many hours, clearly identifying the ship as American. They came in with low reconnaissance aircraft. They came back with unmarked planes. They came back with unmarked torpedo boats. They viciously attacked this ship. They killed 34 Americans, wounded 174 Americans. And then when they listened to radio intercepts, finding the American Sixth Fleet was on its way with fighters, they broke off the attack and said, oh, it was a mistake. The only problem for Israel was the ship didn't sink. The courageous men on board kept the ship afloat. And even then, even the American Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, at the time, said that Israel made this attack against America deliberately. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, Admiral Thomas Moore, said, and I quote, that this was a deliberate attack by Israel against the United States. How did we respond? Did we bomb Tel Aviv? Did we help the neighboring Arab states invade Israel and stop this terrorist society? No. We sent them more money. We sent them more guns and more planes from which to kill and to maim and to oppress the poor Palestinians who've been driven from their homes, living in squalor for decades because of Jewish supremacists. Number 5, Iraq threatens the peace of the region and its oil-rich neighbors such as Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Well, you know, it's kind of funny, isn't it? America's been bombing Iraq for 10 years, killing thousands of military and civilian personnel in the process, and it's said that Iraq threatens peace. And almost every Arab oil state, as you know, with the exception of Kuwait, has formally opposed this planned invasion of Iraq. Number 6 reason is that, quote, Iraq invaded another nation, Kuwait, and continually violates human rights in areas of its control. You know, it's true. Iraq did invade Kuwait. No question about that fact. And Iraq was punished for that. It was repulsed and punished for that invasion. No question about that. The war killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops. They had an embargo that's killed hundreds of thousands of their elderly and children. Iraq had some of its territory chopped off, and the Kurds now have become practically autonomous in northern Iraq. Iraq has been punished severely for that war in Kuwait. Now notice this hypocrisy with Israel's invasion of Lebanon. Israel did not punish Lebanon for invading, America did not punish Israel for invading Lebanon and causing the deaths of between 30 and 40,000 Lebanese civilians, destroying 100,000 homes, destroying much of the most beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities in all the Mideast, Beirut. In fact, we even continue to support Israel after Sharon's mass murder of 1,500 unarmed men and women and children at the Israeli concentration camp at Sabra and Shatila. Israel has repeatedly invaded its neighbors many times and taken huge chunks of their territories and subjected their inhabitants to a brutal military occupation. But why invade Iraq? Finally, the argument is brought forth that invading and taking over Iraq will help stop terrorism. Number 7. On the contrary, it will certainly cause increased terrorism against the United States and our people. A government can try to take away every civil liberty of its people, but it cannot ultimately stop individual acts of terrorism by someone willing to risk or even sacrifice his own life to do such. Take, for example, the recent sniper in Washington, D.C. One man, in a period of 3 to 4 weeks, paralyzed the nation's capital. We live in an age where terrorism is almost impossible to prevent by physical means. The only reliable way is to lessen the underlying reasons for it. If America would have minded its own business over the past few years, the World Trade Center would still be standing, and Americans would not be living in fear. Our hard-won constitutional liberties and rights would still be intact. As you know, they're being eroded in the United States very rapidly. Now, these are the reasons advanced by the Jewish supremacists and their supporters for war against Iraq. And none of those reasons hold up to the light of day. None of them. And that's because there's only one real reason for this war. The fact is that influential Jewish supremacists in Israel and around the world, they want this war. And they want to use America as their bully boy. Israel wants no other nation in the Middle East to challenge their military supremacy. Iraq, with the world's second largest oil reserves, has that potential. And Israel doesn't give a damn how much this war will hurt America and the American people, how much it will hurt your own individual nations, how much turmoil it will cause. As always, they're concerned only about one issue, and that's what they consider to be the well-being of the state of Israel. The truth is, this war against Iraq is not only a war against that nation and all of Arabia, really, and it's really a war against the United States of America, the American people. Because this war is against every interest of the American people. When I saw the World Trade Center on fire and in flames on that day, I had tears in my eyes for my country. How have we come to this? How has terrorism come to our shores? And you know what reminded me? You know what I thought of when I saw that? And that evening I was thinking about it and said, how could this occur? And I remembered an interview which I saw on American national television with Madeleine Albright, our Jewish supremacist Secretary of State at the time, on the program called 60 Minutes. And at this time, the embargo against Iraq had been going on for a few years, and there are many hundreds of thousands of casualties in that country. And Leslie Stahl, the interviewer of 60 Minutes, asked the American Secretary of State, she said, Madeleine, she said, there's been reports that 600,000 Iraqi children have died from this embargo. She said, that's more children than at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And she said, to get one man to get a Saddam Hussein, do you think this is worth it? And Madeleine Albright sat for a second and thought. And then she said, yes. She said, it's a very hard decision, but we think it's worth it. The Jewish Secretary of State of the United States of America saying, it's worth it to cause the death of 600,000 children to go after one man. 600,000 children. And at that moment, I couldn't very well have tremendous hatred of the people who are upset with America around the world. And as an American, that night I thought, where is this all leading to? What's the next step? There are millions of Americans who live around the world, expats, of course, millions. The government can't protect all Americans, not here, not in any country of the world. America, no matter what we do, will be vulnerable to terrorism. And the government of the United States right now is busily taking away our most very basic human rights, our constitutional rights, rights for which the American people sacrificed and bled, rights for which our nation was established and built. I know that there'll be people after my speech who will say, what an un-American thing to do. Go around the world and argue against American foreign policy. I'm not arguing against American foreign policy, ladies and gentlemen. I'm arguing against Jewish supremacy. I'm arguing against a foreign nation controlling the government of my country. I'm arguing against brutality inflicted by that government. The Jewish religion, back to even Old Testament times, has a long record of supremacist ideology, of brutal behavior. And what Israel is doing today is reflective of that history. It's not an aberration. And the only way you're going to be able to fight against the ever-expanding Israel, whose borders may be right across the Gulf very shortly, if things keep going the way they're going, is to understand that Zionism is not simply a Middle Eastern problem, but a world problem. The founder of Zionism, the roots of it, came from Moses Hess. And Moses Hess, in his most famous work, had a very interesting quote. He said, "We must be Jews first and human beings second." And that certainly reflects exactly what's happening to the Palestinian people. And it's certainly reflecting their chutzpah and what they're doing to the American people. If Hitler would have said, "We must be Germans first and human beings second," he would have been roundly condemned. But Jewish leaders can say these kinds of things with impunity and with immunity in the world press because they control so much of it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you that the last few days that I've spent here and in your neighboring nations has given me insight. I've been in Palestine before. I've never been in this part of the Middle East. And I've been impressed by the people. Even though the government of the United States has done many things I think that is reprehensible, I must tell you that I've been treated decently and fairly, and everywhere I've seen friendship toward the American people at large. One lady who I talked to the other day said that, instead of damaging American relations, as has been said by, I think, the members of the U.S. government in this part of the world, they said, "You've increased and helped American relations because you showed the average person of this part of the world that America is not unified in their support of the evil and the criminal acts of Israel. And you make us realize the American people are individuals and that not all Americans go along with the Jewish supremacist control of our society in the Middle East." I want to tell you that I am very thankful for you. I think your efforts to support the Palestinian cause, I think your efforts to fight for your own liberty is, in a sense, an effort that defends the liberty and the rights that I have as an American and that people all over the world have. So I'm here to thank you and to tell you that not to stop in this fight. Work harder, be self-sacrificing, tell the truth, keep working, and someday we will have peace and freedom for the Palestinian people and truly for all the people of the world. Thank you very much. Would you like some questions? Yes. Excuse me.
I'm very happy with your
Excuse me, ma'am.
This lecture to be in America, not in Bahrain or in the Middle East.
Oh, ma'am, I give this lecture in America every chance I get.
and you teach your children, average children, as you said, about the Muslims. Always, when anyone from the Middle East, they say Muslim commit a crime. When the Christian child kill anyone in the school or FBI man damage the building, never say Christian. They say American person. But when anyone did any problem, they said Muslim did this.
There's a reason for this. The same Jewish press that always says, you shouldn't have any sort of religious feeling or prejudice is the same Jewish press that's creating this because it's in their interest to create this at this particular point. So that's why. Yes.
Excuse me, gentlemen, what is your strategy, like a Christianity, you are Christian, what is your strategy in America against the Jewish people? If they are so strong in America, what is your policy against those? Still, now you are America is in the hands of Jewish now, as you are saying.
I'm doing everything that I can. I'm educating people.
My question is this, why you are not teaching to your peoples actually, American peoples? This is the main thing.
Well, if you think I'm not teaching, let me tell you something. The Israeli government came out with a recent commission opposing so-called world anti-Semitism. And they mentioned one person as one of their biggest enemies and a big danger to Israel in America and around the world. You know who they mentioned? David Duke. So, you know, and I have, and like the lady says, we need you to teach this to your own people. This is my first trip here. My whole life I've been teaching it to my own people. In America, I've also taught it to my relatives in Europe and Eastern Europe. And I published a book recently in Russia. And the Jewish committee in Russia tried to get the Russian Duma, the parliament, to ban my book. Because they said my book is more dangerous than the Protocols of Zion. Actually, I think it's more accurate than the Protocols. It's up to date. And so I'm doing everything I can. But I think it's good, and what people have told me is it's good for you to hear someone from America to come and say these things as well. It makes it more powerful, because people will say you have a built-in prejudice against Israel from this part of the world, but an American comes and says it makes your own arguments more effective, even among your own people. And there is a need to educate people in this part of the world as well. I'll give you an example. You have two news magazines on sale here all over Arabia, Newsweek and Time magazine. They even print it in the Arabian language. I don't understand why this magazine is even bought by any people in this part of the world, any Arabian individual. Both magazines are controlled by Zionists. The New York Times, Time magazine is by Time Warner, which is run by Gerald Lavon, and the Newsweek is a subsidiary of the Washington Post and Catherine Meyer Graham, and yet it has business here. I mean, there's a lot of education that needs to be done right here as well, and I hope I can contribute to that. Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Duke, for your informative talk. Actually, it appears to be very deplorable that the U.S. intellectuals, except very few, not raising their voice under the circumstances. I mean, the U.S. intellectuals are not assertive themselves against the present government policy. What may be the reasons that the U.S. intellectuals not playing their roles to mold the situation, to educate the people, to assert themselves?
My hearing is not that great. I didn't quite understand what you said. If somebody else could paraphrase it simply for me.
You see,
Wait.
Intellectuals playing a more active role, I think, is what he
Oh, okay. He said, well, shouldn't intellectuals play a more active role? Absolutely. But let me tell you something. In Europe and America, for an intellectual, a college professor or a leading thinker or writer, for them to come out and talk about the things I talked about is almost the destruction of their career. It takes a lot of courage. But we're all going to have to start coming out more openly and talking about these issues if we're going to survive. Like I said, the new thrust of Zionism is not just the Middle East, it's also globalism. Globalism is not your friend. World government will crush freedom like a steamroller would crush a flower. How can people, say in Zurich or New York or anywhere else in the world, determine what the best laws are for you or how you should live or what your economy should be? The best governments are always the closest to the people, the smallest governments. World government basically ends with lack of freedom. And the Zionists are behind the world globalization effort, no question about it. And they want to use the United States as the weapon. They're using us as their enforcer. And you must oppose this globalism. The diversity of the world, our different cultures and races and heritages and religions, that's great in this earth. And I don't want to see McDonald's on every corner, even though I've had a McDonald's hamburger once or twice. I like the fact we have different cultures and music and food and the different things of the world. And globalism is an attempt to subjugate you and really ultimately subjugate the American people. We're being subjugated by the same process. So we need to look at the bigger picture, and I think it's part of the worldwide efforts and aims of Zionism.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm American, so hi.
Yes. Hi.
I want to say I agree with you about your criticism of Israel, and in America I do a lot of work and say a lot of the same stuff you do, and I get a lot of crap for it, obviously. However, yes. I think that if I were in America now, and no offense to you, I'm just going to be very direct, all of the Arab and Muslim people that I work for Palestine for would be outside your door with pickets demonstrating against you. Because there's a lot of hypocrisy in what you're saying. You say it's interesting for them to accuse me of being, or you say Jewish separatists, you criticize them for being separatists.
I criticize them for being supremacists.
I'm sorry?
Let me explain my position.
Let me finish my question first.
Sure.
You accuse them of dividing and conquer, entering selective coalitions to pursue their own agenda. You say that the SS and the Nazi Party had to prove that 6 generations back they were white. You say that the danger was assimilation with the Greeks, and that's why the Jews celebrate that holiday that you said, I think it was Yom Kippur. I would like to know how, coming from the position of someone who used to be a leader of the KKK and who believes in white purity and white separatism, how you think that your views on white
let me answer.
specialness are any different than Zionist views on Jewish supremacy.
Okay, let me answer your question. Thank you for your question. First off, I'm 53 years old, and yes, I was in a Klan group over 25 years ago. And I can't say that I've always been perfectly tolerant in my life. Maybe you've never been intolerant about any subject or any issue, but I can't say that I've done things that I would change and that I regret. But I certainly have grown in that matter. And I want to get to the heart now of what you're talking about in terms of the Jewish supremacism, what I'm talking about in terms of preserving our own heritage. I have not said, and I'm not opposed to people wanting to preserve their heritage. I really believe that, I read an article when I was in Qatar yesterday, and the article was about the fact that if foreigners come in, even to say Bahrain, if you had massive immigration of, say, people from Norway into this part of the world, who are Christians from Norway, to where they became a majority of the country here, all right, then obviously Muslim tradition would suffer. If they became a majority, they became the ruling part of the government, then you'd lose the basic cultural values of this particular country. I don't think there's anything wrong with America remaining basically as a Christian nation, but primarily a Christian nation. You know, if we sing Christmas carols in our schools, I don't see a big problem with that. So I'm not in favor of massive immigration. And I think most people in the world feel the same way. If you had massive immigration from Europe here, most of you would be opposed to it if it would be the sense where you'd be a minority. That's not hatred. And there's a difference between loving your heritage and trying to suppress or oppress other people. I am not a white supremacist. I've never called myself a white supremacist. I don't believe in white supremacy. In fact, I believe in white stupidity in a lot of ways in my society. But I am proud of my heritage. I'm a European American, and I'm proud of that heritage. I'm going to preserve that heritage. I'm going to preserve my faith, just like most people of the world do. The difference is, the people who promoted this so-called egalitarianism that you're talking about, like the immigration, the biggest promotions of massive non-European immigration to America have been the American Jewish Committee. I can document this. So while Jewish media and Jewish organizations in America support massive immigration to my country, they support Israel, which is limited only to Jewish immigration. So, I don't think, I'm being a hypocrite because I'm not a supremacist as such. But I do, want to preserve my heritage, but with respect for other races and with respect for other religions. And I do believe, as I said earlier, that Islam is actually the closest faith to Christianity, where Judaism has been opposed to Christianity dramatically. And Judaism in the United States, they've been the ones behind saying we can't sing Christmas songs in our own country. Imagine in this country if they said you couldn't sing songs of your heritage and your culture and your faith. And so that's the only answer I have to the question. I'm not a perfect man. I don't claim to be a perfect man. But I am a Christian, and I do pray to God for forgiveness of my sins, and I do try to live my life decently and to help people and to tell the truth all that I can. I hope that answers your question. Let's go on.
Well, on the 25th of March 2000, on the 25th of March 2000, you have talked about diversity, and you said that it's not the strength in America. Well, I understand the massive immigration to the States or any country is harmful.
Yes.
But do you oppose the presence of minority there in the States?
I ran for the United States Senate, and I was served in the Louisiana legislature. I never did anything against minorities. I preached equal rights for all. I don't want to take away the rights of anybody, and I agree with you, which is exactly what you said, massive immigration. I'm just opposed to massive immigration. And I think most people of the world are. I just think we have a double standard. And ironically, the same press in America that promotes this is the same press that supports Israel, which is based on ethnic purity.
The second and the final piece. Aren't you scared to be harmed by the Mossad of your thoughts? Aren't you scared to keep those
certainly
thoughts?
Crossed my mind a few times.
Or maybe chased even by the CIA or the FBI?
Well, I'm more concerned about the Mossad. They're the most brutal people of all. And what I'm most concerned about is character assassination. And this lady here, and I appreciate your question very much. And this lady had a legitimate question. And I used to say this in Louisiana when I ran for office. And by the way, as serving in the legislature, I supported many legislation. I don't think there's one piece of legislation you look at that you would be opposed to that I supported when I was actually had a chance to serve. But I wouldn't blame anybody for walking into a hall and prejudging me and having prejudice against me and think this is a very bad guy. But the same people that would condemn me like George Bush are the same people that shake Ariel Sharon's hand and have tea and crumpets with him. We live in a world that's got a lot of hypocrisy going on. And I'm trying to live my life the best I can. I'm not a perfect man, but at least I'm standing up, and I am concerned about the Mossad, but I'm more concerned about the character assassination. For instance, I'll give you an example. I came here to speak on the Israeli issue. It's about ideas and issues. When you can't argue a man, you basically attack the man. And the Israelis and the Jewish supremacists are the greatest character assassination experts in the world. They know how to make people look bad. And I think I've had my share of that, more than my share of it. And I don't like to read these newspaper reports and read these lies like they said I had to resign my position as Republican chairman because of my association with white supremacist groups. That was in the paper the other day. Totally untrue. I got elected years after I was in the Klan, years after. And I was elected to the Republican Central Committee in the largest district of Louisiana, and then I was elected by the other elected officials as chairman. Those people certainly would not have voted for me if they thought that I was a supremacist or a hater or a bigot or anything like that. The Republican Party opposed me for one reason, and that was because of the Jewish influence in both the Republican and Democratic Party that opposes any American that dares to stand up to this Jewish lobby. And as an American, I'll say one more thing to you, that we have a lot of treason going on in our country. Our country is occupied right now. And it's going to end up in the death of a lot more people than the 3,000 at the World Trade Center if this continues. They're now busily taking away our rights and freedoms. One of the leading, quote, Jewish civil rights leaders in the United States of America is a man named Alan Dershowitz, supposedly civil rights activist, right? He recently came out and said that he endorses the right of the government to use torture on suspects in the United States of America, just like Israel does. Just like Israel does. Torture. And the Washington Post and the New York Times all floated pieces. Is it time for torture? And government officials said, is it now time for torture because America faces a threat? Even to imagine torture as being presented now as a possibility or as just like trial balloons is an example of where we're going. And what I'm trying to tell you is that these Jewish supremacists who control us are very evil men. And they want to create a world government, and they really believe that they have some sort of divine right to rule us, not just the Palestinians, not just Arabia, but the United States, Europe, and the world. I know that may sound radical, but please read my book. Go to my website, look up my sources from major Jewish sources, read them, and see if you might not agree. I'll be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night I've got the most dynamic lecture at all. We'll have more questions then. We're out of time. More questions then. Bring your friends, bring your family. I'll be back here tomorrow night. I love you, and thank you very much. Thank you.